The wind swept sharply through downtown Portland as Elena Ward tightened the fraying straps of her canvas backpack and tucked herself closer to the red brick wall of an old bakery. She had learned to move silently, to blend in, to keep her head down. Years on the streets had taught her that attention, whether pitying or hostile, was rarely worth the cost. At 36, Elena wore her resilience like armor. Her dark curls, usually tied into a makeshift bun, slipped loose in the rain. Her brown eyes, tired yet alert, scanned the streets not just for danger, but for possibility, no matter how faint. Her olive-toned skin was weathered from cold nights, but there was still something unmistakably dignified about her posture. She carried herself like someone who once belonged to a different world, because she had. Every morning, she woke up on a flattened piece of cardboard behind the bakery dumpster, stretching her stiff limbs before brushing off yesterday's dust. Her routine was simple: secure her few belongings, grab coffee from the shelter if it was open, then walk to the library where she could read, rest, and feel, for a few hours, like a person who still had potential. Most people saw a homeless woman. Elena saw a shell. Temporary, she prayed. Something she intended to break free from. Inside her backpack was one treasure: a thin notebook filled with sketches. Evening gowns, structured suits, handbags, designs drawn with the precision of someone who knew the language of fashion deeply, someone who once spoke it fluently. Her hands trembled when she touched those pages, not from the cold, but from memory. She had once dreamed of becoming a designer. Years ago, before her mother's illness drained their finances, before the medical debt pulled her under, before losing her apartment and then her job, she had worked as an assistant at a small boutique brand. She wasn't paid much, but she was allowed to sketch during breaks. Her supervisor once said, "Elena, you've got something the industry can't teach." Back then, she believed it. Now she clung to that notebook like a final thread to a life she wasn't sure she still deserved. It was on a rainy Tuesday that everything changed. Elena was walking past the old Monarch building, once home to a high-end luxury fashion house, known for its timeless craftsmanship. The brand had died years ago, suffocated by mismanagement and failure to adapt to modern markets. The building was graffiti-tagged, windows boarded, and doors chained. But today, a man in a tailored charcoal overcoat stood outside, staring up at the giant faded Monarch letters, like someone trying to read ghosts. He was older, late 50s maybe, with silver-streaked hair and a face carved with years of corporate battles. His name was Graham Huxley, a venture capitalist known for resurrecting dying companies. He had dropped a folder, papers spilling across the wet sidewalk. Instinctively, Elena rushed to help him, kneeling to gather the damp pages. "Thank you," he said, studying her with a brief, curious gaze. "Are you familiar with this building?" Elena swallowed. "Only what it used to be." "What did it used to be?" he asked, almost testing her. "A fashion house," she answered. "Not perfect, but legendary in its time. Monarch had a soul. They didn't just design, they crafted. Their last collection, about 12 years ago, was built around the concept of rebirth, ironically." His eyebrows lifted. "You know a lot about Monarch." "Everyone who cared about design did," Elena said before she could stop herself. Graham paused. "What's your name?" "Elena," she said, but her voice felt suddenly fragile. He glanced at her backpack, the worn clothes, the cold stiffness in her posture. But he didn't look pitying, only thoughtful. "Well, Elena," he said, "I'm reopening this place. I'm looking for perspectives that aren't clouded by ego or outdated industry thinking. People who know what Monarch was and what it could be." Elena blinked, confused. "Why tell me?" "Because sometimes," he said quietly, "the right person sees things clearer from the outside." And then he handed her a card. "Come tomorrow," he said. "Think of it as an interview, no resume needed." The next morning, Elena stood in front of the Monarch building again, card clutched in her hand. Inside, the place was a ruin. Dusty mannequins, broken mirrors, scraps of fabric discolored by age. But to Elena, it felt holy, like walking into a cathedral of forgotten dreams. Graham greeted her with two other staff members: Lana Brooks, a sharp-tongued operations manager in a navy pantsuit, and Devin Chase, a soft-spoken financial analyst who seemed nervous for her. "Why is she here?" Lana whispered harshly, not realizing Elena could hear. Graham didn't answer. Instead, he nodded for Elena to follow him into what used to be Monarch's design studio. The room was empty except for a table. "Here," he said, placing paper and pencils in front of her. "Show me how you see Monarch." Elena hesitated, then opened her backpack and pulled out her notebook. As she flipped through her sketches, Graham's expression changed. The man who rarely showed emotion softened, his eyes widening with something like awe. "These are—" he exhaled slowly. "Elena, this is vision." Lana crossed her arms. "These are rough sketches at best." "They're brilliant," Graham corrected sharply. "Raw, yes, but visionary." He turned back to Elena. "Tell me," he said, "what do you think Monarch should stand for now?" Elena looked around the old studio. Authenticity, craftsmanship, stories. People are tired of disposable fashion. They want meaning, purpose. They want to feel like what they're wearing matters. Graham nodded slowly. That's exactly what Monarch lost. And then, in the most unlikely moment of her life, Elena Ward, homeless, invisible, forgotten, was offered a position. Not assistant, not consultant, creative director. The news spread through the industry like wildfire. A homeless woman being named creative director of a relaunching luxury brand? Ridiculous, reckless, destined to fail, critics said. Elena heard all of it, but she didn't flinch. Every morning she walked into the Monarch building wearing donated clothes from the shelter. Every night she stayed late, sketching until her fingers cramped. She studied Monarch's archives, learning the rise and fall of the empire she now had the impossible task of resurrecting. At her first meeting with Fashion Press, a reporter asked, "How can someone with no formal credentials lead Monarch?" Elena answered calmly, "The streets teach discipline, survival teaches innovation, and passion, well, that can't be taught anywhere." Some laughed, some sneered, but others leaned forward, because sincerity was impossible to fake. Inside Monarch, Elena fostered an entirely new culture. She encouraged interns to pitch ideas, seamstresses to critique designs, and warehouse staff to suggest improvements. "You never know who has the solution," she told the team. "Let everyone speak." People were hesitant at first, but soon walls broke down. Even Lana, who'd once dismissed her, began to respect the clarity and conviction in Elena's decisions. Devin said later, "She didn't lead like a CEO. She led like someone who had nothing left to lose and everything left to prove." The first collection took 8 months. It blended Monarch's signature, sharp tailoring with soft silhouettes inspired by Elena's sketches. The centerpiece was a gown embroidered with a rising phoenix. Reporters later wrote that the dress seemed to glow from within. During the unveiling show, the audience went silent as the final model stepped out. Cameras flashed. Gasps filled the room. And Elena, standing backstage with shaking hands, realized they believed. They really believed. Within weeks, Monarch sold out its capsule collection. Celebrities posted photos wearing her designs. Fashion magazines called her the new voice of American luxury. But Elena wasn't dazzled by fame. She was focused, determined, almost fierce in her commitment. Employees said that working for Elena felt different from any job they'd ever had. She had a way of turning pain into fuel, of reminding people that great things emerge from unlikely places. A seamstress named Rosa once told her, "You make us feel like what we do matters." Elena smiled softly. "It does." As Monarch rose, Elena found herself confronting emotions she had stashed away for years. The memory of her mother, who had believed so deeply in her. The bitterness of losing everything. The fear of failing again. Graham noticed her struggle. "You don't have to outrun your past," he told her. "You only have to outgrow it." She cried quietly that night, but she woke up stronger. Monarch launched new initiatives, scholarships for struggling art students, employment programs for women transitioning out of homelessness, and partnerships with shelters across the country. Elena insisted on them. "Luxury shouldn't just elevate the wealthy," she said. "It should uplift society." At Monarch's grand reopening gala, Elena gave a speech that would later go viral. "I was overlooked, ignored, written off, But potential doesn't disappear just because someone stops seeing it. Don't let your circumstances define your worth. You can rise from anywhere. Yes, CEO. That morning, Elena walked into Monarch's sleek, glass-walled boardroom, wearing a white tailored suit from her own collection. 12 board members turned to face her, some skeptical, some proud. Graham sat at the head of the table, then stood and gestured toward her seat. Today, he announced, we vote to transfer operational leadership of Monarch to Elena Ward. Lana stood and applauded first. Slowly, the rest followed. Elena sat down, heart racing, hands steady. Her first words as CEO were simple. Let's build something worth remembering. Years later, journalists didn't talk about the homeless woman who got lucky. They talked about the visionary leader who redefined luxury, not as excess, but as meaning. They talked about the woman who rebuilt an empire from ashes. They talked about Elena Ward, a woman who proved that no matter how far you fall, your story isn't over, unless you decide it is.